The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Dave. Dave's going to tell us where and when he was born. He's going to describe what it was like where he grew up, the schools he went to, and the education that he received. So, Dave, if you can start off with those details, please.
I will be happy to, and thank you again for having me on your show. I was born in East Tennessee in the United States, up in the mountainous area of East Tennessee. And I grew up in a musical family. My mother and father both played the piano, and my grandmother Combs, she was only 4'8" tall, but she could really play music, and she loved to sing and play. And her favorite instrument to play was an auto harp. I don't know whether any of your listeners might be familiar with it, but it's a musical instrument, stringed instrument that uses chords, but the auto harp. And she loved to play this. Now, she was born in 1894, so this is back before we had a lot of electricity around. So she played the old pump organ, and the pump organ you played by pumping your feet to pump air through the organ so it would make the sound. But she loved to play her pump organ and sing all the hymns and good Christian music. And she was a wonderful inspiration to me growing up. So I grew up in East Tennessee, and if you're familiar with the state of Tennessee in the United States, it's known for its music. Nashville, Tennessee is called Music City, USA, and it earns its reputation. But I grew up around music, and I went to school. In elementary school, we had a gentleman, Uncle Pat, that came to the school once a week and taught us all the fun songs to sing. And then went to high school and sang in the chorus, and again was around music. In my church, my family was very religious. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night prayer meeting. And so we were around music, and music is a big part of our church services, as it is there where you are. And so I grew up around people that loved music and inspired me with music. Took piano lessons when I was like 8 years old or so, a couple of years of that, and enough to learn to read notes. And then I basically the rest of it I taught myself how to play by just basically learning and practicing and listening to other people play and just going through the hymn book or sheet music and just sit down. It was really hours of practice is how you learn just about anything. Time on task, I think they call it. So I learned how to play the piano, and I ended up going to college at the East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee, and excuse me. And I was a math major and a physics minor. My goal in my career was to be a computer programmer. I had learned about computers and I wanted to do that. So I got my degree in math because back then we didn't even have a thing called computer science degrees. And so my math major, I worked in the computer center as a part-time job. So when I graduated from college, I had 4 years of experience programming computers and working in computers. And I got hired right off the bat by a company called Western Electric here in the United States. And they were a technology company that dealt a lot with the telephone industry. Basically, they were a part of what we called Ma Bell back then, when the Bell system was still intact. So I worked for AT&T or Western Electric for 22 and a half years, and all during that time though.
When did you start with Western Electric?
That was in 1969. I graduated from college in 1969, and 2 weeks later started my job at Western Electric. And stayed with them until I finally left the company in 1992 to do my music full time. And of course, there's a long process between starting my career as a college graduate and doing my music. And so I was doing my business with Western Electric, AT&T. I got my MBA from Wake Forest University somewhere in about 1978. So what
was the job that you were doing then?
In 1978, we were implementing new manufacturing control software. It was a logistics kind of program that the technology and the philosophy of logistics and just in time was just being implemented throughout manufacturing in the United States. And so I was part of that process.
So just taking you back to sort of when you kind of left college in what 1969.
69,
So 69, you had the space mission gone off. So computers had been around then.
Yes.
I mean,
they were huge. You know, they were big pieces of equipment. And
well, we had computers from the Second World War with Alan Turing and
yes,
the Bomber machine that was, I guess, the first computer.
mm-hmm.
So by 1969, you had some. I mean, they were big things. They didn't have personal computers back then. That's for sure.
No, it's funny. The computer I learned to program on in the university setting at ETSU, it was about maybe 8 feet wide, had it looked like a big desk with a console display behind it with blinking lights. I mean, it was a fun thing to watch because when it was running, all the lights were blinking on and off. It looked like something from Space Odyssey movie or something going on. But that thing was, and you know, the output of that computer was an IBM electric typewriter that typed 10 characters a second on its own. And I always thought that was my introduction to this amazing machine, was it could sit there and type all by itself. And but boy, have we come a long way since then. And you know how much memory it had? 30K. Now, not megabytes, 30K was its memory. Oh my goodness, I've got more power in my phone here than you know the entire country had back then. So it's amazing.
We've certainly come a long way. So you started off as a programmer back in those days. So what was the programming language that you were using at that time?
Well, when I went to work with Western Electric, the main language we used was COBOL, COBOL, COBOL. And so I guess now I'm a dinosaur as a COBOL programmer. But believe it or not, there are still companies around that have COBOL programs that still run on a mainframe someplace. Those are called legacy systems. And most of those are being, phased out and being transferred over to the new programming languages. But it was COBOL, which was a wonderful language for business processing of, I designed systems for employees' accounts for Western Electric and basically some billing systems for the missile defense system that we were working on at Western Electric. And it was a fun job of playing, writing programs for the computer. But I left that after about 3 years to go into management. So I got promoted up into management and started up the management ranks. And that's when I went back to school, got my MBA, and then we started implementing the new just-in-time software systems, manufacturing requirements planning, where we were trying to match up the supply chain with when you needed it on the factory floor. And it was a fun job. And it was one of those jobs where I was traveling around the country. Western Electric had, I don't remember how many, it was like maybe 20 factories around the country. And my job was to travel around to these factories and help them implement this new software. Well, one of the factories that I went to visit was in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, ironically,
while you were there,
while I was there,
I can guarantee that you spent at least one night in the Grand Ole Opry.
I did indeed, and Opryland Hotel and Grand Ole Opry, and that is a wonderful town. I love Nashville. But the main thing that happened was that this was in 1986 was when I was in Nashville, and it was 5 years prior in 1981 that I had written this song called Rachel's Song. And I wrote it in 1981, and in fact, it didn't even have a name at that time. I just had played it. I sat down at the piano and started playing this song, and it didn't have a name, and I didn't even really sit down to try to write it. I played it. Now, you've probably talked to people that are creative that say things they just come to you. They're either you're the recipient of a song. You don't sit down to necessarily write that song. So I created the melody on the piano. My wife came home from work a couple days later and said, "What's the name of this song I've had stuck in my head all day long, humming it?" She hummed a little bit of it, and I said, "Well, it doesn't have a name." Well, she said, you play it all the time on the piano." I said, "Well, it's just something I made up." Well, she got all excited, and she said, "Well, have you written it down?" I said, "No, I've got it up here, no problem." And she said, "Oh, well, that is a problem. If something happened to you, that song would be gone." So she said, "You better write it down." So I did. I wrote the melody and the chords down on a piece of paper. And then a couple of years later, some good friends of ours had a little baby girl. Her name is Rachel. And so at her christening service, they had a grand piano up at the front of the church. So I went up to the piano with permission of the family and said, "I'm going to play this little tune." And so I did. I sat down at the piano and played it. Well, halfway through the song, I could hear all the sniffles in the crowd. Everybody was getting a little bit emotional about this music, and including me. I think I had a tear or two running down my cheeks. Well, and when I finished, I looked over at little Rachel being held in the arms of her mother, and I said to everybody there, "From now on, we're going to call this song Rachel's Song in her honor." And that's how the song, Tim, got its name. And boy, it fit. It just was perfect, a perfect fit. And then it was 3 years later after that I was in Nashville, and Linda said, "Well, while you're there, why don't you get a demo recording made of Rachel's song?" I said, "Okay." So I went around Nashville and found a studio and a musician, a recording engineer, who introduced me to Gary Prim. Gary Prim is the artist that recorded Rachel's song on the demo for me. And so a couple of weeks later, after I got hooked up with Gary, we met in a studio one evening, a Friday evening in 1986. And I was in the control room with the engineer, and Gary's out in the studio with the piano playing it. And I tell you, Tim, I was just blown away. When you hear something that's the only way you've ever heard it before is me playing it, which is fine, but it was very simple. But to hear a professional musician in a studio playing my song the way only professional studio musicians can, which is just fantastic. Their skill and ability and creativity, it just blows you away. I was amazed. I must have had my mouth open the whole time because it was totally amazing. And then he added some strings and some horns and some electric piano parts to it. And when he was all finished, wow, it sounded as good as anything I'd ever heard on the radio. So that was the beginning of my introduction to the recording industry in Nashville and my relationship with Gary Prim. Gary has since recorded over 170 songs with me. I've written over 120, but that one song really changed my life when I heard that, and it really, the light bulb went off in my mind that this is something special. I remember saying to myself on the way back to the hotel that night, and playing the song on my car radio on the cassette player in the car, and I kept saying, "This is it. This is it." Now, Tim, I didn't know what it was, but I knew this was it. And sure enough, that one song led to other songs. I recorded a whole album in 1986, again with Gary Prim, released my first CD, got it played on the radio all over the country, and people started writing me letters from the radio airplay about Rachel's song. And I realized that, this is really it. And I just need to figure out how to turn it into a business.
So from that first recording then, who actually marketed it? Who got it onto the radio in the first place? Did you have to walk around all the radio studios with a CD saying, "Here, can you play this?" and or did you have an agent that went round and did it? Did Gary do it for you?
You're looking at the agent right here. You've probably seen the movie or heard of the movie Coal Miner's Daughter, where Loretta Lynn went around to radio stations and handed out her records. "Here, play this. Would you play my record?" Well, I did some of that. I was doing some traveling for AT&T or Western Electric at the time, and I'd often go to a plant, and if I saw a radio tower, I'd find a little station, and I'd go in there and I'd hand them. I had a little 45 record made of Rachel's song. I'd hand them a record, say, "Here, play this on the radio." And one time I was going up the mountain towards Virginia, and I tuned in the local FM or AM station, a little tiny town. And just as I tuned it to the radio, I hear this announcer say, she was saying, well, now I'm going to play for you my very favorite song. And she played Rachel's song, and I just about ran off the road, Tim. It was amazing. First time I'd ever heard it, just, stumbling on it on the radio. But yes, I did that. But I also spent a lot of time calling the program directors at FM stations all across the country that were easy listening stations. Do you all still have easy listening stations in England that play instrumental pretty easy?
So yeah,
Well,
there's quite a few. There's
good. Well,
Mellow
maybe I
Magic.
need to move to England, because they're about extinct here in the United States. Everything has gone another direction. But I had a good friend of mine that had a radio station on Saturday mornings. He was a big band jazz. He knew everything about big band jazz, and he had like a 3-hour radio program on a local station, FM station. And he heard Rachel's song, and he was just he was moved to tears when he heard it. He said, you got to let me play this on my radio show. I said, okay, Bob. His name's Bob McHone. And I said, all right. Well, I loaned him my master reel-to-reel tape. That's all I had at the time. It'd only been recorded a week ago. So I loaned him my master tape. It was a reel-to-reel 1/4-inch tape. And he took it to the station. They made a copy, and he played it on the radio for that very first time that next Saturday morning. And I never will forget. Linda and I were at home, my wife, and we had it, of course, tuned in. And I hear Bob announce the song, and then he played it. Well, that was the first time that song had ever been played on the radio. And later in that day, the station manager called me, and he says, Dave, I've been in radio for over 20 years, and I have never had this happen. He said, when your song came on the radio, our phone bank at the radio station lit up. Everybody was calling in saying, what's that song you're playing? Would you play that again? And tell me about this guy, Dave Combs in Winston-Salem. So it was amazing. He was absolutely amazed. So that's when I realized I got to get this song on more than just that one radio station. And I got busy locating all the easy listening stations in the country. Back then, it wasn't easy. We didn't have the internet, and we couldn't just Google and find anything. You had to really go to the library or really research it. But I ended up calling a lot of FM radio stations, and I'd send them the recording. They'd play it, and the same thing would happen to them. They'd end up playing it over and over and over, and I ended up getting it played through some of these programming businesses. There were companies like Bonneville Broadcasting that programmed the music for hundreds of radio stations. And once that person was sold on my music, instantly I went from just a few radio stations. He put it out all to hundreds of stations all over the country. And then I really started getting some fan mail. People would write me. They'd call the station and get my address, and here'd come a letter from somebody telling me, oh, your music just brought me to tears. And, where can I get this music? And that's when I realized, Tim, that this needed to be, I hate to say monetized, because that's the kind of the current lingo. Yeah. Back then I was wanting to know, how can I take this music and get it out there to more people? And that was when I started thinking about, how can I create a music business out of this? And maybe eventually it might grow to the point where I could leave my job at AT&T and do my music full time. So this was
what did AT&T think about all this then?
Well, it's funny. You'd think that
you're running around the country on their business, doing your business, trying to get your music played on radio stations.
Well, I separated my time from, I didn't do my music on company time, so to speak. Like when I went to Nashville to get the recording made, that was in the evening, because I was having to spend the nights. I was working there all week, staying in a hotel. So after hours is when I did this prospecting around for a studio. So I really didn't try to take away from my job at AT&T. I enjoyed it. I did a great job and had great people I was working with and for. And ironically, the people that I worked with and for also loved Rachel's song. I mean, they all, of course, I played it for them, and they loved it too. And they, quite frankly, were not surprised at all at the success that I had with my music getting around the country and everything. It was just when they heard it, said, yeah, this is as good as anything I ever heard on the radio. Sounds like a theme to a movie or something. And so there was really no real conflict there, Tim.
So when did you make the decision to give up working for AT&T and go full on with your own business? Obviously, you were getting some royalties off of Rachel's song by this time, and from the rest of the album, did it go out with the rest of the album, or did that come a little bit later once Rachel's song had taken off?
Well, it was really a much slower process. This was 86 when we got it first recorded. 1988, the album came out. And between 88 and 1992, I had done enough music to create additional albums. I did about an album a year. My second album was a Christmas album. My third album was original music. I had written enough songs, 15 or so, for a brand new album. So every year, for the next 10 years, really, I went back to Nashville with new music and recorded more songs with Gary Prim. Now, the airplay on the radio was really kind of the way the song got its life and showed me that it had some real value. And the business side of it, though, came from how do you sell your tapes and CD. Back then it was cassette tapes mainly. And then CDs were starting around at 1988 or so. But how do you take these products, the CDs, and sell them? Well, I was pretty naive, Tim. I thought that I would just march right into, back then we had record stores. You could go in and buy records or music. I thought, well, now that it's really successful on the radio, they'll just be welcome me into the store and say, oh, Dave, we've been waiting for you to come in and let us sell your music. Well, it didn't work that way, Tim. The music stores were mainly interested in selling really big name artists and popular music. Instrumental music like mine was a kind of a niche that they weren't really interested in. They didn't think that it had much market value. So they were really discouraging to me and didn't want to carry my music at all. So I had to think of another way. I knew that people, when they heard it, like on the radio, they wanted to buy it. So Linda and I got our heads together and we thought, how are we going to sell this? People have got to hear this. And something happened that was, I call it a God wink, which means that really could not have happened by accident. I don't think. Very few things in life are purely accidental. I think that especially the big events in your life, when you meet your spouse or when certain things happen that just could not be coincidence. Well, one of the ladies that I worked with, and I was working in Maryland at the time with AT&T, one of my ladies that worked right behind me in the cubicle behind me, she said, I've got a friend that owns a gift shop in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia. And that's a tourist town right outside of Washington, D.C. Big tourist town. Lots of thousands of tourists come there every day. And she says, this lady owns a gift shop, and I'd like to give her a CD of Rachel's songs so she could play it in her shop. And so I said, okay. So I gave her a CD, and I really didn't think much about it. And about 3 or 4 days later, I get a phone call from Jane that owns this gift shop. Now, the gift shop's name was America, and they sold patriotic Americana kind of things. I'm sure you have shops in England that are very English, patriotic-oriented shops. Well, turns out she was playing CDs of John Philip Sousa, the national anthem, all the favorite patriotic songs, and she had a CD changer, and one of the 5 she put Rachel's song in. And every time my CD rotated into rotation in the shop, all the customers in her shop would stop where they are and say, "Whoa, I like it!" And they'd run over to the counter and say, "Do you have that music for sale? I want to take that home with me." And so she said, "No, she didn't have it." So she was a very smart business lady. She knew that I got to get some of this music because I'm missing sales if I don't. So she called me and told me this story about what happened with Rachel's song. And she said, "Can you sell me some of the CDs?" And so I said, "Sure." So that evening, my wife and I boxed up a box of tapes and CDs, and we drove down to Old Town Alexandria and gave Jane a box of CDs and tapes. And that was my first wholesale sale of Rachel's song. And I had no idea what's going to happen. Well, Tim, here's what happened. About a week later, or less than a week later, I get another phone call from Jane. Says, Dave, those are all gone, and you need to bring me some more. How about double the order on this time? So I boxed up some more, and we went down in the evening to Old Town, dropped them off. Well, I made that trip to Old Town every week for at least a year. And, you know, she sold thousands of albums out of that little gift shop only by playing it over the system in her shop and to her customers. They hear it, they go over to the counter, buy it, and take it home. So that was when the light bulb went off for me, being an entrepreneur, saying, and a business person, that I thought, well, let's look at what's going on with this one gift shop. Here's I made me a spreadsheet. Here's how many. Here's what it costs me to buy my CD. Here's how many she's selling. Here's how much I'm selling it to her for. Down at the bottom, here's my gross profit. Here's how much I make off of every CD, and times the number she's selling. Wow, well, that's a pretty good number. Then Linda and I said, what if we had one gift shop like hers in every state? That's just 50. You know, that's a very small number in the scheme of things. So I made another column in my spreadsheet with the same numbers. Column 1 times 50. And look at the bottom line gross profit number. That was an eye opener. That's a pretty good number. And I said, well, what if we had like 5 gift shops in every state? Just 250 in the whole country. Column 3 times number 1 times 250. And I said, look at here, Linda. This is about double what I'm making at AT&T. This is a big number. I said, okay, I think we've found our business model here of something we need to replicate. So that's when we decided, Tim, that we needed to go out and find other gift shops around that would play and sell my music. And I didn't hire anybody to do this. It was me. And on the weekends, me and my wife, Linda, we would go to little tourist towns around the Washington, D.C. area. And we'd go up and down the street, pop our heads in these gift shops. And if I heard pretty music playing, I'd asked to speak to the manager of the store and tell them ask them if they played or sold the music that they played. And I'd give them a CD or either a cassette tape or a CD, whichever they played, and just leave it with them and say, if you like this music, give me a call and maybe we can do some business. And that we did that every weekend for weeks and weeks. And almost every time somebody that had any business sense at all in a gift shop, knowing that they want to sell what people want, they'd call me up and say, Dave, all right, send me 10 CDs and let's see what happens. And I grew my business from that one little gift shop to, I think in about 2 or 3 weeks or a month or so, I had like 20 some gift shops. And then I decided, I ran out of territory that I could drive to comfortably. You can only go, say, 50-mile radius without, going too far. So then I decided the best way to market may be by telephone. Well, this is before internet and before Google and before you could find out all this. So I did find out you could purchase the mailing list for all the gift shops in the entire country. There was a company, I forget the name of the company, that sold the list. You could buy it. And it was a computer printout, and it came, and it was about 4 inches thick, big, wide, green striped computer paper. You've probably seen some. Yeah. And it had every gift shop in every little town alphabetically by state. So I said, well, now and there were only like 75,000 gift shops. Well, I thought, this is going to take me a while. You can imagine that was a bit daunting. And
it's also going to run up your phone bill.
Oh my goodness! And this was back, and I worked for the phone company, AT&T.
So did you get a discount on the phone calls?
I did get a little discount, but still. And back then, they printed out every phone call you made. And in your phone bill, it itemized every phone call that you had ever made. Well, I started on Saturday morning, and I would be calling these gift shops from 10 o'clock when the shops opened until about probably 6 o'clock when my voice would give out after talking all day long. I made hundreds of phone calls, and here's what I would say. I can say it in my sleep. Do you sell any tapes or CDs of the music that you play in your shop? And they would say, no, I don't play music, in which case I would say, well, thank you very much, and hang up. About a 13-second phone call. Or they would say, well, I play music, but we don't sell it. And I said, well, then I'd engage them a little bit and say, do your customers ever ask about the music you play in your shop? Well, yeah, they do sometimes. Well, have you ever thought about selling it? Well, we have kind of considered it. Well, let me send you one of my albums, and here's what my wholesale price is, and play it and see what you think. If they ask for it, maybe we can do some business. Nobody turns down, something free in the mail. So I get their address and I'd make up a package to send to them. Or they would say, very rarely back then, would they say, yeah, we sell the CDs of the music we play. And I'd get to send them a copy. Well, I do this all day long. And my phone bill that first month, after I did all that every weekend, it came in a shoe box size box. I mean, they had to send my bill in a box. It was so thick. It was amazing. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was the little 13-second phone calls. But I was having to make 30 phone calls, Tim, just to get one person that would say yes. Most of them would say no and weren't interested. 1 out of 30. And this is not a good hit rate. This is wearing me out, because I'd call all day long and I'd have maybe 15 prospective customers at the end of the day, which is okay. But that was a lot of phone calling. Well, I'm an analytical person. I'm a math major, physics minor, spreadsheet kind of guy. So I'm thinking, how can I connect and calculate or find where the gift shops are in tourist areas? Because I had realized that it was tourist areas that were the prospects for me, because they have brand new customers in their shops every day. They're not selling to the same person over and over and over and over. So I wanted to know, where are the tourist towns in the United States? So I called the Chamber of Commerce, Better Business Bureau. I thought surely somebody has this fancy list of all the tourist towns in the country. Well, nope, nobody had, not even the National Chamber of Commerce or the Department of Commerce, nobody. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to do this. And so I got to thinking, what are the data characteristics of a tourist town? And this is kind of a little test for you, Tim. Tourist towns they're usually small towns, right?
Yep.
And they have tons of gift shops. I mean, maybe a little town might have 25 or 30 gift shops. Each down Main Street, they may have one shop right after another. And how many people live in a tourist town permanently? What's the permanent population of a tourist town? It's usually pretty small, right?
Probably about 15% of the population of the town in the season.
Yeah, right. So it's a very small population. So I said, what I need to know is how many gift shops are in a town and what's its population. Because if I have those two numbers, I can calculate the population per gift shop, and that will tell me, okay, well, if there's 50 gift shops and only 500 people live in the town, there's no way in the world 500 people can support 50 gift shops. That has to mean it's a tourist town, right? All the customers have got to come from somewhere besides out of the town. Got to come from out of town. So I took my printout, my 4-inch printout, and I went through and I just counted for every little town, how many gift shops are there? Well, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, those of you are familiar with Gatlinburg, Tennessee, it's a tourist place. And I knew that. So you go down and you count, my gosh, there's 75 gift shops in Gatlinburg. So to get the population, I found in the library a wonderful book called The Marketing Atlas. It's a great big book. It weighs about 12 pounds. It's about this thick, but it had every crossroad in the country with its population. I mean, every little tiny little place. So any place that I found, I could just look up, oh, they've got 700 people live there, 200, whatever it is. So I built me another spreadsheet, Tim. Here I go with my spreadsheet again. And I put the name of the town and how many gift shops that I'd counted up and how many people lived there that I had looked up in the atlas. And I made another column, said, okay, just divide this column by that column and get a ratio. And then sort the whole database or the whole spreadsheet by that ratio. Well, my goodness, it was like cream rising to the top. It was right at the top of the state of Tennessee. Oh, there's Gatlinburg, number one. Here's another number two. And in North Carolina, I knew where those were. Blowing Rock, North Carolina, right at the top. So I knew the methodology worked. And so I could go into any state that I had never even been in. And I knew exactly where the tourist towns were.
So now this spreadsheet, by this time, you must have been able to do it on a computer.
Yes.
Or was it all manual?
Now, by this time, it was Apple Computer had come out with their first computers. And Linda and I were one of the first purchasers of Apple. This was on an original Apple SE computer. It was the first all-in-one computer. It had the screen and everything inside and a little keyboard. And it was a wonder. I still have it. It still works, believe it or not. I can turn it on. It still works. But that computer had a little spreadsheet maker in it, and that's how I did it. Was that little? I'm not even sure they called it a spreadsheet then. I'm not sure what it was, but that's what it was. It wasn't Excel or anything. But then all of a sudden, I knew in every state, even if I had never been there, where the tourist towns were. So I could, on a Saturday and Sunday, instead of calling blindly, I could target my calling to start at the most tourist towns in every state on the East Coast, start calling. And my hit rate, Tim, this is the important thing, the light bulb really made a difference. My hit rate went from 1 in 30 being successful to 1 in 5, and sometimes even better. But on average, I'd only have to make 5 phone calls and bingo, I had a new customer instead of 1 in 30. Well, that just exploded my number of prospects. And so instead of having 10 or 15, I'd have 100 packages to send out on the mail on Monday to prospective shops. Well, I grew my gift shop business from a small number to over 1,000. Over 1,000.
Wow.
And so that's what enabled me to, in 1992, have lunch with my boss in Greensboro and say, well, I hate to tell you this, but I need to take 5 days a week off.
Old Johnny paycheck.
Yeah, but he was very understanding. He knew it was coming. He could tell we were good friends anyway, and we talked about things. So he knew it was coming. But that was the day I handed him my letter and said, I hereby resign my position at Western, or AT&T at the time. And he was very understanding. He's still a good friend and a colleague. So that's how I ended up growing my business then from a little business model that I knew worked in one little gift shop, and simply using the principle of duplication or replication. You take something that works and you then just simply make copies of it all over the place, anywhere you can. And I think that's the business model. It's certainly the business model of that's where franchises come from.
Yeah.
They get something really well. It works so well, they franchise it. I didn't franchise mine, but it's the same principle of replication. But that's the story of how and it didn't happen overnight, as you could tell from my story. I spent a lot of time on the phone and working and with shoe leather, driving around and finding things that did not work, but it eventually did work. And so it was a happy day when I was finally able to say, all right, I work for myself. My wife and I can spend our time on our music business and creating music and spreading it all over the country. And now we spread it all over the world through the internet.
So just taking you back a little step. So your business model was starting to work. You get more and more gift shops that are going to take on your music. So how did you go about having enough music to be able to send out? Did you go? Did you have a local recording studio that produced the stuff, or a local factory that churned out your CDs and your cassettes?
Well, and back in the 80s, there were very few CD manufacturing locations. The factories that made CDs were, I think there may have been, when I first started, there might have been only less than 10 in the whole country. And in fact, one of them was that I found was in Pennsylvania. My wife and I drove up to the factory and got to see the place that made the CDs. But it was basically ordering from these CD manufacturing companies. You send them the masters and the artwork and the orders and everything. And then it's a pretty automated process even back then. And so they were able to make the CDs for me. And I had to order enough of them to where they shipped on a pallet. I'm talking about a pallet that's a full 5 foot by 5 foot pallet, stacked up about 4 feet tall, full of boxes of CDs and cassette tapes. And so those were ordered from these factories that was their business, was manufacturing cassette. The cassette tape manufacturer was in Nashville, Tennessee. And the CDs started out in Pennsylvania, but they also migrated into Tennessee as well. But I would order maybe 5,000 or 10,000 at a time. I mean, we were shipping out to gift shops, 5,000-10,000 a month of CDs to these people. So it was big, took a lot of work. I had to hire an employee full time, and it was just our office manager employee and me and Linda, and that was it, that fulfilled all these orders and answered the phone and took care of business.
So that's really good. So, I mean, obviously you had to make that initial sort of outlay to get this stuff recorded to be able to send out. And did you have anybody welch on the deal that didn't pay took a load of product and didn't cough up for them?
Very few. I still have a little folder over here. I just kept it, I guess, for posterity, but somebody that ended up still owing me $200 or, a small amount. It wasn't thousands or anything. But by and large, people were very honest. Now, my customers, these gift shops, were primarily privately owned. These were individuals that I was dealing with, and they were, they had a reputation to uplift and uphold in their community. So they couldn't afford to get a reputation of being a deadbeat kind of thing. So no, I really didn't have any collection issues to speak of. And if somebody was a little slow, we'd call them and they'd pay up. But no, it wasn't a really big problem, thank goodness.
So how many people do you employ nowadays?
It's just me. Now everything is digital. The sales of music is pretty well, and here in the United States, it's on Amazon. I'm working on how I can make sure that the folks in the United Kingdom can download my music as well. I know they can get to my book through Amazon, because Amazon UK has a branch as well. And the books are available really through any bookstore in the world. Through Ingram Publishing publishes or prints my book and makes it available. So the book itself is available, but the music, I'm still working on a little kinks of. I ran into somebody this week that said he had trouble in England trying to download my music. Well, if you have trouble there, he was able to find a way to do it, but I'd like to make sure that it's an easy thing. You just click and it's there. So I'm working on that.
And another question I have for you: do you do sheet music?
Yes, I do. One of the things that if you're a musician, do you play an instrument, Tim?
Oh, me? I haven't got a musical bone in my body.
Okay, all right. Well, I never know.
I'll tell you a story about this. My grandfather, he was a songwriter, he was a script writer, and he used to produce music for travel logs, particularly from Ireland. He did a lot of those. And my nan and my aunt, who inherited his estate, was still getting royalties from some of the music that he'd written a long time ago.
Right.
And only stopped just a few years back. I guess when he got to the 75-year mark where royalties no longer last. But he also wrote scripts, and he was a director of films. So he directed a couple of films in Ireland mainly. The West Kerry Men was one of the films that he did. So,
wow, that's quite a legacy. Wow. Well, yes, you asked about the sheet music. Somehow that gene went on to somebody else.
Yeah,
I understand. But yet,
my wife does play the piano.
Okay, well, you can tell her that I do have, when she hears my music, she's probably going to tell you, Tim, I want to play this on my piano. Well, I had a lot of people say the same thing and I'm a piano player too. When I would hear a pretty song on the radio, a new one that the theme from Love Story or whatever, that was a beautiful song on the piano, I thought, and I got to play that. So you'd run to the music store, sheet music, and buy the sheet music so you can play it. Well, I needed to do the same thing with my music. So I took every one of my instrumental albums that are original compositions and all of my favorite hymns albums, 11 of them, and I transcribed the music that Gary played in the studio. Now, this is all Gary's arrangements in his head as he's playing it. So I'm having to write down on the sheet of paper exactly the notes that he played. Now, that is a laborious, tedious process. And so, but I did that for all 11 of my albums. So you can go on my website, combsmusic.com, and you'll see on my music page, there's sheet music books that you can purchase of my music, and probably in England, what they would want to do is to download the sheet music from Sheet Music Plus. There's a website called Sheet Music Plus. And they have all of my sheet music. You can download one song at a time for $4.99. I'm not sure what it is in pounds, but you can do a song at a time, or you can download the whole album for, it'd be about $15, whatever that translates to in pounds. But she can download the music from Sheet Music Plus of any of my songs, or especially Rachel's song, and play it for herself. In fact, it's note for note what's on the album. Play the song, play right along with it. Put the album on and play right with it.
Oh, brilliant. So that's where you are today. You're
yes.
Very successful career.
And, well, it's evolving. It has been a successful career, continues to generate a fair amount of income, and it's evolving now into the digital world of downloads and streaming. And then last October, of course, I wrote my new book called Touched by the Music, which is all of these stories, some of which I've told today, but the book is full of these inspiring stories of what happened to me along this journey from Rachel's song to today. And one of the chapters in the book, chapter 21, is full of stories that I have received from fans who have written me their little story of what the music meant to them. And I included a whole chapter of those in my book. Over the years, I have received, Tim, over 50,000 letters and notes from people about my music. It is just such a heartwarming experience to go through those boxes of letters and stuff, to read what people said about how my music touched their lives. And I am so honored. And I usually have to get a box of Kleenex sometimes, because some of them are really touching. I mean, really, where somebody's, hearing my music they're on their deathbed or for a loved one. I remember one of them was some lady. She said she was a nurse, and she was in the hospital taking care of this elderly lady who was on her last days of her life and was barely conscious. And so she said, I played Rachel's song for her in her hospital room. And she said, I knew that this lady had played the piano in her younger days. And she said the most touching thing, she said, I watched as I played Rachel's song, and this lady's hands were moving like she was playing her piano there in the bed with her eyes closed, but her fingers were moving. The music was getting to her. And so stories like that they're just so touching and personal that I just really they're inspiring, and I've tried to convey that in my book.
Well, I think that's really good. I shall download your book. And have you done it as an Audible book as well?
Yes, I have. If you go on Amazon, I spent about 30 hours recording it. But if you want to listen, it's me reading it. I have narrated my own book. It's about an 8-hour long recording, but it's available in audiobooks, and Amazon calls it Audible. If you're an Audible person.
I'm on Audible.
Yep. Well, then you probably have enough points. You can download it probably for free. But it's me reading it.
Exactly, but you get it for credit.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And I also have it on it's paperback, Audible, and
Kindle.
And Kindle, yes, the electronic ebook.
The Amazon ebook, yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Dave, for sharing your story today.
Well, thank you for having me, Tim. This has been a real pleasure to walk down memory lane here, so that's good.
Excellent.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.